Hi, it's Dwyer. It's October 7th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, I made a video talking about the short list. I named 6 guys on the pound for pound list today in boxing, right? This list, of course, is going to change over time. There are going to be new names added based on recent performances. Some guys are going to drop off the list. It'll be a list we'll update periodically. I'll make that part of my presentation here online. But many of you in the comment section, and the comment section is at least as important as the video, felt that I left someone off the list. Right? Several of you mentioned a fighter who, I admit, on my own ballot, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. That's if I had a vote. Right? That fighter was Dimitri Bivol. Just understand, I consider Bivol to be a brilliant fighter. Understand, Bivol is a personal favorite. I've made several videos here online about Bivol fights going back years. Right? Bivol is certainly, to me, a first ballot Hall of Famer. I can tell you that one of my favorite fights of the last decade, high-level fight involving 2 fighters who I believe will be in the Hall of Fame, was Bivol against Gilberto Ramirez. Right? Big time fight. The guys, friends outside of the ring, sparred together in the past before they fought. Right? Understand, at the time of the fight, Gilberto Ramirez, in fact, both guys were unbeaten. Right? Ramirez, since that fight, moved up to cruiserweight. That's 25 pounds up. Right? Boxing needs to put a division between light heavy 175 and cruiser 200. But understand, Gilberto Ramirez made it up to cruiserweight, picked up the title there. Has not lost since. Right? Is currently out of surgery. Ramirez openly admits that he walks around at heavier than the cruiserweight division. You do have a bridgerweight division. You also have a heavyweight division where I feel Gilberto Ramirez would be competitive. Right? So just understand, I've seen Bivol beat guys, Beterbiev, for example. I thought Bivol won both fights, who I feel will be Hall of Famers. Right? And I believe I rate fighters like Jean Pascal higher than most of the public. Right? Bivol beat him. But, folks, when we're talking about the short list, right, again, 6 names. 6 names. When we're talking about the short list, it's exclusive. In my opinion, these are the best of the best right now. Right now, you know, one of the tenets I believe in is that life's unfair. You can be brilliant. You can be first ballot. That doesn't mean you make this list. If there are 5, 6, 7 guys who pound for pound are better than you in the moment. Right? Now let me just say this. Terence Crawford could sit down and could talk with Bivol. Both guys beat Canelo. Right? One righty, one lefty. But understand, Crawford invited Bivol into his camp. Bivol was part of Crawford's preparation. Right? Crawford understood that, he needed Bivol's advice. Bivol's advice was helpful because Bivol, like Crawford, is a craftsman. But I would argue, and this is in a conversation where, I openly admit Bivol's a brilliant fighter. Bivol, to me, is an obvious first ballot Hall of Famer. But understand the difference between the two men, and it's profound. Crawford, after talking with Bivol about beating Canelo with movement on a back foot, right? And after figuring out how to take what Bivol says as an orthodox fighter and convert it into Crawford's southpaw stance, right? Because Crawford beats Canelo as a southpaw. Just understand that Crawford could get up after talking with Bivol, after having a kinship with Bivol, because both of the guys are defensively blessed, right? Both of the guys are extremely adept on their back foot. But understand, Crawford could leave that meeting, go to another meeting with Gennady Golovkin, a guy who had a KO streak as champion, right? A puncher's puncher, a slugger. And understand, Crawford could sit down with Golovkin and be conversant, because Crawford, as champion, had a KO streak during his reign. Several year KO streak. In other words, Crawford has a room he can walk into that Bivol, who's only had one stoppage since 2018, cannot walk in. Right? And that's the puncher room. Right? Crawford, as good as he is on his back foot, understand, that's only one part of his game. Crawford's actually a closer. Right? Let me say, too, the secret to athletes is the diversity of their games. In other words, Ali, understand, in the 60s, great back foot, great boxer, great jab, could beat you on the scorecards. But Ali during that era was actually stopping guys. Right? In fact, it's worse than that. Ali's calling rounds during that era. Right? He's stopping guys. Not just Sonny Liston. Right? Liston retires on his stool the first fight, but gets stopped in the second fight. But the Cleveland Williamses of the world, the Zora Follies of the world. In fact, Ali is so much of a closer in the 1960s that when Ernie Terrell goes the distance with him, the press thought that Ali prolonged that fight to punish Terrell for calling him Cassius Clay. That's the What's My Name fight. Right? I would argue that it's when you look at guys who've hit 50 home runs in a season, and understand, I'm really a baseball guy, not even a current baseball guy, a baseball guy masquerading as a boxing expert here online. When you look at guys who've hit 50 home runs in a season, and you realize that, Willie Mays was one of the dominant 5-tool guys, they call it, in baseball. Right? That Willie Mays led the league in steals multiple years. Right? Willie Mays had a great arm. When you realize that Aaron Judge, 62 home runs, multiple 50 home run years, is your reigning American League batting champion. Right? Forget the home runs. Folks, he's the batting champion right now. When you realize that Shohei Ohtani, not only has hit 50 home runs in a season, but he pitches and throws in the 90s. And by the way, he's the only member in the history of baseball of the 50-50 club. Right? That's when you start to realize the level of depth and greatness these guys have. So let's look at the 6 I picked. Right? 3 are consensus. I believe most fans understand that Crawford is on the list. Inoue is on the list. Understand, folks, Inoue just won a boxing match. And this is one of the sport's premier closers. Right? Of course, Usyk's on the list. I would make the argument that if you look closely at the rematch of Usyk against Daniel Dubois, a guy who knocked out AJ several times, a guy, the only man to stop Jarrell Miller, right? A guy with a punch. You'll notice if you look at the film a few times that Usyk's going for the knockout from the opening bell. He's throwing that Ivan punch of his, that wider left hand power punch, several times in that fight. Right? And of course, Usyk is one of the dominant boxers of our time. To understand Usyk, look at the 12th round of the first Anthony Joshua fight. Here's Usyk in with one of the biggest punchers of our era. That's who Joshua is. And Usyk, after outboxing Joshua, right? The only question in the 12th round, well, you have 2. One is Joshua going to get lucky and get a stoppage, right? Because a puncher only has to be right once. The second question, since the fight was in Joshua's backyard, not Usyk's, was whether the judges were going to be fair to Usyk. Well, understand what happened in that 12th round. Usyk came out and opened the door that we didn't even know was there. Usyk, who had famously stopped Tony Bellew, right, in the UK, with 30 seconds left in the fight, opens up. And you understood Usyk had his room. A room where he's able to stop guys. He almost stops Joshua in the last 30 seconds. You want to see a fighter relieved to hear the final bell? Look at Joshua when the bell rings for the 12th round in that fight. Now let me just say, all of the guys I named, the 3 I added to the consensus 3, are Jay Opetaia, one of the champs at cruiserweight. Opetaia, by the way, is openly saying he wants to unify at cruiser. Right? The problem is that Gilberto Ramirez is, fresh out of surgery. The other problem is, Ramirez is a big guy. And if I'm Ramirez, I'm thinking, look, I've been champ at 168. Think about his career. I've been champ at 200. What's in it for me to fight Jay Opetaia? Maybe I need to jump to Lawrence Okole's own division and bring a luster to the Bridgerweight division. Well, I need for folks to understand that Jay Opetaia, Jaron Ennis, and Janabek, right? All 3 of those guys not only can stop you, but they can outbox you. Right? I don't know what I'm getting with Jay Opetaia. Let's say I'm an opponent. Let's say I'm world ranked. Let's say I'm trying to win his title. Right? Just understand, chances are, since Opetaia is one of the best athletes in the game, chances are Opetaia has faster hand speed than me, has better foot speed than me, is a better boxer than me. More importantly, if he lands, he can stop me. So I don't quite know what strategy he's going to use. The same can be applied to Jaron Ennis. Right? Let me point out too, Ennis is fighting in Philly. It's a big card. By chance, you actually have a boogeyman for Gilberto Ramirez on the undercard, and he's going off at a better than 4-1 favorite. Fans should take a look at Jesse Reid, who's on the card. Reid is older now. He's in his mid-30s, right? But just recognize that an argument can be made that apart from Dimitri Bivol, Reid is the toughest opponent Gilberto Ramirez has faced. They actually faced each other twice, believe it or not. It wasn't a fluke. Jesse Reid was tough both times. Right? Take a look at that. Well, let me just say, Bivol, great fighter, 34, right? Champion, reigning champion. Folks, he's not on the list because, again, he only has one stoppage since 2018. In other words, he's a brilliant tactician who you understand is going to come to outbox you. The truth is a little bit more nuanced. He's a fighter who, like Usyk, fights with a reserve, right? You notice that Bivol's actually, when he gets going, a combination puncher. You see the hand speed, right? He can open up. He hasn't had the opportunity to do so against Beterbiev, but he can open up and he can be alpha in a fight, right? But understand, he remains in his construct. This isn't a Terence Crawford who has this whole other room, right? You need to think of Crawford as a guy who's, let's say, like Michael Jordan, right? Understand, Jordan won Defensive Player of the Year one year, right? Jordan, dominant defender, several all-defense teams. He could legitimately sit down and talk with Dennis Rodman, one of the great defenders, Hall of Famer, fellow Hall of Famer with Jordan. And they could talk about defense all night and intensity and stuff like that. They could compare notes, right? Jordan was that good defensively, right? But then Jordan could leave and go into a room with Wilt Chamberlain, Elgin Baylor, George Gervin, the best scorers in NBA history. And Jordan, who averaged over 30 a game, would be able to talk shop with them. Right? That's who Terence Crawford is. Right? That's not who Dimitri Bivol is. Right? Bivol doesn't have the power. One man's opinion. The comment section's open, guys. You know, my feeling is that the online experience actively involves the comment section. I want to hear from you. But I would argue that, like Shakur Stevenson, who you look at and you say, wow, he's a brilliant boxer, isn't he? Right? You need to understand that Shakur is not Ali. Shakur is not Ray Leonard, right? Ray, for all the boxing highlights, and my God, Ray Leonard has some of the best boxing highlights I've ever seen, right? Just understand that Ray Leonard ended his career, and he fought guys, right? Benitez, Duran, Hagler, Hearns. He ended his career with a knockout percentage greater than 60%. Right? That's what we're talking about. You know, Bivol made a decision. He used to be a knockout puncher. If you look at his stats, you'll see he's around 50% right now. But as he got higher in the rankings, And as he started fighting the Jean Pascals of the world, the Joe Smiths of the world, he changed his approach. So now he's a back foot boxer technician. He's not a Ray Robinson boxer puncher. He's not a Terrence Crawford technician puncher. Right? The reason I say technician is there are some fights where Crawford comes out and he's front foot. Right? If Crawford were a serial killer, the FBI would have a hard time catching up with him, because the greatness of Crawford is he has different modus operandi. I would say the same is true right now of Opataya and Jaron Ennis. You look at an Ennis fight. In fact, look at the Stanionis fight. Folks, Ennis wins that fight, believe it or not, for all the jumping around and all the jabs and all the movement. He wins that fight on body punches. It's a body punch that puts Stanionis down. Right? Ennis is that lethal. You look at him and you think he's boxing. He's actually taking away the other guy's body and the other guy's front foot heavy. A slugger. Right? Janabek, a little bit different than the other guys. Janabek doesn't really dance that much. He's not on the balls of his feet. He's flat-footed. Right? But folks, let's just say deep in the pocket, you quickly realize how few guys in the sport can fight inside. Janabek can fight inside. He's not even in a rush. And of course, Janabek has one of the best straight left hands in boxing. Right? I would argue few have the level of straight left that Janabek has. Right? Manny Pacquiao is back. If Pacquiao still has the level of straight left that he had in his 30s, right? Pacquiao, of course, is mid-40s. Pacquiao's competitive in terms of straight lefts with Janabek. Right? But folks, with Bivol, you're a gambler. You're thinking, okay, do I take Bivol? Do I take the over? Isn't that what you're thinking? If there's an over-under and he's facing a credible opponent, right, Joe Smith, Gilberto Ramirez, right, you're going to sit there and, Beterbiev. You're going to sit there and you're going to say, wow, okay. And keep in mind, the Beterbiev fight, that's different than Crawford fighting for the first time at 154. That fight went the distance for the first time at 168. Right? Bivol's division is 175. You knew in your heart that Beterbiev first fight, for Bivol to win, it had to go the distance. At least it had to go to the over. Right? Second fight, you weren't thinking Bivol was going to come out on his front foot and take out Arthur Beterbiev. Right? I would argue that every cruiserweight fight that Jay Opataya has, you have to think of the knockout as a legitimate option. Right? Every Jay Opataya fight. And understand, Opataya fought Maris Briedis. Briedis, obvious first ballot Hall of Famer. I would argue, and this is well into Usyk's run in the heavyweight division, that the toughest opponent Usyk fought is Maris Briedis. That was at cruiserweight. Right? Briedis gave Usyk more problems than any heavyweight has. Right? You don't have a ninth round in the Usyk-Briedis fight. I understand that Tyson Fury first fight's a split decision. Right? But there is no round where Briedis gets a, count against Usyk. Right? Well, Briedis faced Jay Opataya, broke his jaw. Opetaya's been tested. Opetaya won that fight. Opetaya's unbeaten as I make this video. We'll find out in Philadelphia this weekend just how well adjusted Jaron Ennis is to 154. It's an open question, folks. It's a loaded division. It's a loaded division. I will just say this. Very few guys can beat Sebastian Fundora. And we'll find out a lot because Fundora has a very tough fight against future Hall of Famer, and that's who he is, Keith Thurman, whose only loss was to Manny Pacquiao, in part because of the Pacquiao straight left we're talking about, which knocked down Keith Thurman. Thurman gets off the canvas, starts to come back in that fight, but he was fighting a loved fighter. Right? When you think Pacquiao, the level of love is on par with the level of love Ray Leonard got. Right? Let me add too, Ali, I mentioned him. Ali was loved in the 70s, not the 60s. In the 60s, he's viewed as dodging the draft. He's viewed as black militant Muslim. Right? So, folks, Bivol's not on my list. I considered him, I even mentioned him in the video, not as a candidate, but I refer to one of his fights. But he's not on my list because I don't know how you can be on the short list of the best pound for pound with only one stoppage over a 6 to 7 year period. Right? Most of the guys on the list are boxer punchers or puncher boxers, depending on how you see Janabek. Right? Bivol is a future Hall of Famer, but he's not a puncher at this stage of his career. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.